everyone, Kyle Erickson here. The day has finally come. I ordered the new iPad Air as soon as it was announced because for me, it was the best value buy at this past Apple event. This machine does take the same form factor as the previous gen iPad Air and keeps a lot of the same components of that 4th gen model, but it also does upgrade and load it up with a lot more. It comes in 5 different colors: space gray, starlight, purple, pink, and blue. Starlight is what I have here, which is sort of like a silver gold color. I decided to go with Starlight because it's a bit more neutral than the other colors, and I just like the way that the light color pops against the black edges of the screen. But I do like that these colors have a little bit more pop than the 2020 iPad Airs, which were a little bit more dull in color. The previous 4th gen iPad Air that I had was space gray, and as you can see, they are virtually identical on the outside. You have your Touch ID / power button along the top or side, I guess depending on how you're holding it. On the edge around the corner to that, you have your volume up and down buttons, as well as the magnetic strip down from there where you can clip on your Apple Pencil. There are stereo speakers along the top and bottom. The USB-C is also at the bottom, and your cameras are on the front and back. I am totally fine keeping the same form factor and design. It looks nice, and you do have the advantage of being able to use all your previous gen cases and accessories. Apple could have been dicks about it and moved the volume buttons on the opposite side or something and forced us to buy all new accessories, but luckily that isn't the case. The only thing that I wish that they would do on all their tablets is move that front-facing camera from the top when you're holding it in portrait mode just to the side, so it's centered when you're using the camera on video calls when you're holding it in landscape. I just feel like no one ever uses that front camera when they're holding it in portrait, and almost all our accessories are made so that the iPad is sitting in landscape mode when they're not holding it. But other than that, I'm happy that they kept everything else the same. Like the size and shape, not much has changed with the display. I believe it is the same panel as the 4th gen Air. You have a 10.9-inch liquid retina display, 2360 by 1640 resolution, P3 wide color gamut with True Tone, and 500 nits peak brightness. This isn't a whole lot different actually than the panel that's in the 11-inch iPad Pro, which is also a liquid retina display. I think that model has 600 nits peak brightness, but to compare the two is really hard to tell the difference. One thing on the iPad Pro is you do get ProMotion running at 120 Hz, where the Air is just running at 60 Hz, which I am totally fine with at this price point. The colors are vibrant, and while the blacks aren't super black like you'd see on an XDR display, it's still really dark with good uniformity. One thing that I've always appreciated about working on these displays is if you're editing photos or you're creating content on the iPad that people are predominantly going to view on mobile, say for Instagram or social media, the colors are always very close to what you'd see on a phone. If you're editing on a desktop, depending on the display, sometimes that can be wildly different. So it's just comforting to know that you can just pick one of these up and work away and not have to worry about checking any of that. If you do have your heart set on having a ProMotion display, you can jump up to the Pro model, but you are looking at a bit of a jump in price there as well, of around $150 more for comparable specs. And while we're on the topic of specs, this machine, like so many other Apple products, comes with the M1 chip. You've got an 8-core CPU that's 60% faster than the A14 and the last gen Air, and an 8-core GPU that's got twice the power. This comes with 8 gigs of RAM, where the 4th gen Air only had 4, so double there as well, and you've got double the transfer speed on that USB-C port, going from 5 to 10 gigabits per second. I think those upgrades alone are very impressive and make it worth the upgrade for me. The crazy thing is you essentially get double the power for the same price as you would have bought the Air for a few months ago. And with prices of everything going up right now, I think that this might be one of the best value buys out there in this space. The only thing that I have found strange with all of these upgrades is the storage capacity, which is a little bit of a weird one for me. You still have 64 and 256 gigabyte options, and that's all you get. And if you're considering buying one of these, unless you're planning on putting almost nothing on here, you'll probably want to jump up to 256. I don't know why 64 is even an option at this point. It just fills up way too quickly. 256 is probably where you want to be at there. I did run multiple benchmarks on both the A14 and the M1 Air to check a lot of these numbers out, and they are pretty accurate. Compute times were way faster on the M1. Frame rates were averaging about 30 frames per second during the tests that I was doing on the M1, while they were sitting around 12 or 13 on the A14, which actually used slightly more battery power on that A14 as well, which I did find pretty interesting. Those stats aside, in actual use, those jumps in frame rates will be great for gaming. I've played some games from the Apple Arcade and everything has been smooth as butter, and I doubt that there will be much that won't run on this in that regard. Where I'm most looking forward to using this is more power-hungry apps. Lightroom has always worked pretty well for me on the iPad, but sometimes Affinity Photo has been a bit of a drag on resources. And I've said this before, but I am planning on doing more with this iPad, like editing videos when I'm traveling, and maybe some software development. And I know for a fact the M1 can handle everything I need it to there, because I use it in so many of my other devices. Looking at these benchmarks and using the A14 model over the last year, I'm not sure that I can say the same for the 4th gen iPad Air. Another big upgrade in my opinion was the front camera, and it got a bump from 7 megapixels to 12, and that is an ultra wide lens, which I think is important to note here. I mentioned earlier that one thing that I would like to see is for that camera to move so it's centered in landscape mode, because I think it's just a lot more likely that you're going to use that front camera that way versus portrait. With this ultra wide, one thing that has kind of alleviated this issue is the introduction of center stage. We've seen this on a bunch of recent Apple devices where when you move around, the camera essentially follows you and keeps your face centered as much as it possibly can. The camera isn't actually moving around in there, but because this is an ultra wide lens, it's effectively zooming in and sort of cropping the image, which does kind of remove that awkwardness of being off center when you have this in landscape mode. The rear camera, on the other hand, is about the same specs as the 4th gen Air and the M1 iPad Pro main camera. You have your 12 megapixel wide angle lens. The only real difference to that camera is you can now record in extended dynamic range up to 30 frames per second if you're recording video. I don't really use the rear camera on my iPad at all, but I suppose if you're out and for some reason this is the only thing you have and your phone is dead or something, it will do in a pinch. But again, pretty much the same as the previous generation, and that goes the same for the speakers as well. These have the same stereo speaker setup with speakers at each end of the iPad, and I find they do get quite loud, and they're really clear even at full blast. They're going to be as good or better than most laptop speakers, but definitely not up to the level that you'd see in the new MacBook Pros, which I really wouldn't expect. But regardless, they do provide really clean audio, and it doesn't sound flat or tinny. If you're just using this casually around the house, the speakers are more than good enough. But if you do want better sound, you can always connect a set of Bluetooth headphones or speakers. The iPad Air M1 does come with Bluetooth 5.0 as well as Wi-Fi 6 for connectivity. Additionally, if you do want to buy the cellular version, it does have 5G, which I've personally never really had a use for. If I need to connect to a mobile carrier for some reason, I just tether my iPad to my phone, but it is an option there if you need it. I've never had any issues connecting to anything on this iPad, whether that be Apple devices like the Apple Pencil, aftermarket headphones and keyboards, and so on. Last but not least, the final thing that I do want to talk about, which a lot of people have actually asked me about, is the battery. Apple says the battery life is about 10 hours if you're web browsing or watching video. The same numbers that you're going to see on the iPad Pro and the A14 Air, and I found that to be pretty accurate. As I mentioned earlier, I have found under heavy load that the M1 chip does use less power than the A14 model, and I have been able to use the M1 Air for quite a long time with a combination of casual and resource-heavy use. If you are planning on using this for a full 8-hour workday, I do think that it is possible to get through the day on a single charge, provided that you turn down the brightness on the screen and you're not doing anything that really sucks back resources. I've had the brightness turned up all the way the whole time that I've been testing, and I've also been powering a keyboard with a backlight, which isn't exactly ideal for battery life, but for a tablet it has been great on battery. And as with any iPads as well, standby time is amazing. You can leave this iPad for days and come back to it and there'll be almost no battery drain. All in all, I am very happy with the M1 iPad Air so far. I think it's totally worth upgrading with the performance gains that you get. For casual use, just web browsing or looking at social media, sure, you probably won't notice much there, but as soon as you get into any productivity tools or games, or basically anything that's a little more power hungry, you can notice the performance bump. I'm going to drop some links in the description below to the iPad and some of the accessories that I love using, so if you are interested, you can check those out. If you have any questions about this iPad or any thoughts on it, drop those in the comments down below, and hit that like button if you enjoyed this video. It really does help me out a lot and I really do appreciate it. Subscribe for more tech related content. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.